Hello everyone, my name is David Neadel from Blue Feather, and today's presentation is on building fully featured web apps for FileMaker databases. To give you a brief introduction of who I am and my qualifications, I'm a certified FileMaker developer and have been working in FileMaker since 2009. I'm also the creator of the Eloquent FileMaker and Jetstream FileMaker open source PHP packages for the Laravel framework. We'll be using these packages in the session today to quickly set up a web app and to get data in and out of FileMaker. Our goal for this session is to set up a new web app where users can register accounts, log in, edit their profile information, reset their passwords, and then view data only available to registered users. FileMaker will be the only database we're going to use, so all of the user information and data we want to show to the users will be going in and out of a FileMaker database hosted on FileMaker server. Before we get started with the development, let's take a minute to get introduced to the tools and technologies that we're going to be using in this project. Our web application will be developed using a combination of back-end and front-end frameworks to make our lives easier as developers. Frameworks help us do more while writing less code and can help keep our applications more secure by following best practices and implementing common security features out of the box. I'll go through a brief introduction for each of the frameworks we're going to use now, but don't be too intimidated. You won't have to learn too much of these to get started. It's important to know what technologies we're using so that you can expand on them in the future. They're all easy enough to learn by reading through their documentation, and the starter app we're going to deploy today will be a great setup for learning more about them. Let's briefly talk about the frameworks now. For our web application backend, we'll be using the Laravel framework, which will help us organize our code and provide us with great features we need for a backend application, like routing, controllers, API endpoints, email templating, environment configuration, middleware, and excellent security. On top of Laravel, we're going to install a package called Laravel Jetstream, which will set us up with a great starting point for our app. Jetstream is a fully customizable starter kit for Laravel, which sets you up with views and scripting for common web app features like user registration, logins, password resets, and two-factor authentication. To make Laravel and Jetstream work smoothly with FileMaker, we're also going to be installing a PHP package released by Blue Feather called Jetstream FileMaker. This package, combined with Blue Feather's Eloquent FileMaker package, will make interacting with our FileMaker database a breeze without having to deal with the complexity of the data API and manual curl requests. Most importantly, it also gives us access to the features of Laravel's Eloquent framework and all of the cool, useful things Eloquent can do, such as easy model queries and updating, accessors, mutators, events, protected attributes, and route model binding. For our front end, we'll be using Vue and Tailwind. Vue is a reactive JavaScript framework for building user interfaces, which will allow us to quickly and easily create a rich user experience. With Vue, interface elements are broken into components, which can be reused throughout an application. Tailwind is a CSS framework, which will help us easily style our app. We'll use it in our Vue components to get a sharp, modern, and consistent look and feel. Before we get into the coding, there are a few prerequisite pieces of software you're going to need to have installed on your system. You'll need PHP version 8.0 or later, Composer, and Node version 16 or later. I also recommend using a web development server like MAMP to make running and configuring your web application easier. We'll be using MAMP in this presentation to run our web app in our local development environment. As an additional recommendation, I encourage you to use an IDE for development, like PHP Storm or Visual Studio Code. I'll be using IntelliJ today, which is very similar to PHP Storm. We use IDEs for our daily work and strongly recommend getting familiar with one if you plan on doing web application development. Your FileMaker database you plan to use for storing all of your data will also need to be hosted on FileMaker server with the data API enabled. For the best experience, we recommend using the latest version of FileMaker server. Your FileMaker database will need certain tables and fields to manage things like users and password resets. The example FileMaker database included with the Jetstream FileMaker package has the minimum set of required tables and fields which you will need to make sure exist in your file. The example file can be found in the dist folder of the package or downloaded directly from the GitHub repository. You should look at this example file and either copy and paste the tables and fields into your solution, or you can create them manually. You will also need layouts with the fields on them which you want to be used through the Data API, which again is demonstrated in the example file. If you just want to get started quickly, you can host the example file itself and use it as your data source. For today's demo, I've already copied the tables and layouts into my solution, and I've uploaded the database to my FileMaker server, so I'm ready to get started setting up my web app. Composer is a PHP dependency manager. The Composer create project command will download Laravel and set up a new project in a new Jetstream demo directory. With that installed, Jetstream is the next thing to install on top of Laravel. We'll cd into our new project folder and then use the composer require command to download the Jetstream PHP package to our app. Jetstream has some post-install deployment to do, so we're going to do that with the artisan command to install Jetstream using the inertia and view deployment options. Jetstream normally requires a SQL database to connect to. The Jetstream FileMaker package will instead allow us to use our FileMaker database as a data source. Let's install that using Composer. Like with Jetstream, there's some post-install deployment to do for Jetstream FileMaker. Run this deployment using Artisan and the Jetstream FileMaker install command. With everything installed on the PHP side, we need to make a few configuration adjustments to our app. Let's open it up in our IDE and start making some changes. The first change is to tell Laravel to use FileMaker instead of the default Eloquent provider as a source for our users. We'll make this change in the config/auth.php file. The second change is to add our connection to the database config file so that our app knows where to find our database and which credentials to use to connect. Templates for this configuration can be found in the Jetstream FileMaker documentation, so you can just copy and paste this in like I am. With the connection configured, we'll tell the app to actually use it by editing our .env file. The values we set in the env are read by the configuration we set up just a second ago. The .env should not be committed to version control, so it's a safe place to enter credentials like your database password. For the demo today, I've already set up a user in our FileMaker database, which uses demo as both the username and password. I'm also going to add a DB prefix entry to tell our Laravel app to append this value as a prefix to all of our FileMaker layout names. It's a good idea to prefix your layouts like this in your FileMaker database to help keep your layouts used for your Data API requests distinct from your regular UI layouts. Laravel is smart when it comes to automatically figuring out what layouts to look for, and this prefix helps make sure that Laravel can find the right ones without us having to specify it manually. Finally, I'm going to change the session driver to file instead of database so that we're not hitting FileMaker to check user sessions, and the mail host to 0.0.0.0 so that I can use Mailhog, which is a developer tool I already have running on my machine for testing sending email in my local dev environment. All of our PHP packages are installed and the PHP configuration is done. The next step is to install, configure, and compile our JavaScript using Node and Vite. Vite is being used to compile our JavaScript. It also provides hot module reloading so that when we make changes to our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we can see the page update without manually having to refresh the page. I'm going to be hosting this site using HTTPS on MAMP for my local dev environment, so I need to make a few adjustments to the Vite config. You may not need to do this depending on your development environment. Finally, we'll run npm install and then npm run dev, which will install all of our JavaScript dependencies and then start the Vite server, which will watch and compile our assets like our Vue components. Our app should be good to go. Let's configure our web host using MAMP. Laravel applications use the public folder as the web root, so be sure to configure that properly in your web host configuration. You shouldn't expose the root of the application on your web server. I'll configure a new host in MAMP and set up a domain for testing, which will be jetstreamdemo.test. I'm going to save the new host and start up the server. I should be able to see the app running in my web browser. Let's go to jetstreamdemo.test to find out if our app runs. It looks like it works. Let's open the FileMaker database and see what happens when I create a user. I'm going to go through the registration process here and create a user account, which we should see reflected in our FileMaker database by a new user record being added. And there it is. A new user record has been created in our FileMaker database. We can see that the password is securely salted and hashed and isn't readable or decryptable. On the web side, I'm logged in as the user I just created. While our brand new app doesn't do much right now, I'm able to use the features of Jetstream to do things like edit my profile, send an email for a password reset, or enable two-factor authentication. This is as far as Jetstream goes. It's done a lot of the heavy lifting for us as far as getting an app up and running with things like our registration process, login screens, and password resets. But from here, we're going to have to actually start building our app functionality ourselves. Let's say we want to make a company directory where we can log in and see a list of clients and contacts at each company. We want to make sure that this is only visible to logged in users. Let's figure out a strategy of how we're going to make that happen. Laravel works in a model view controller pattern. All the entities, like companies and people, should be represented by a model object in PHP. The views are our layouts and what we see on the screen. We're going to use Vue and Tailwind to create our layouts. The controller is the server-side PHP code which connects the models and views. A controller figures out how to handle our request, gathers and processes the necessary data, and then returns a response to our browser, which might be some data, a layout, a redirect, or possibly even an error message if something has gone wrong. Keeping your code separated into models, views, and controllers helps you maintain and expand your application without things getting too mixed up. As a fast example of how this would work, let's make a page to show a person's profile from our database. Let's start by creating a simple view that we want to show. This will eventually be our full person profile page, but for now, we'll just make a simple placeholder to see that everything is working. I'm going to add a new view component in our resources.js pages folder, which will be the layout on the screen. I'm making a new placeholder view component using the Vue3 composition API format. Now we need a controller, which is going to return the view we just created. I'm going to make a person controller class using Laravel's artisan command line utility. This will create a new controller in the app HTTP controllers folder, which will be our controller for getting person data and returning it to the front end. For now, I'm just going to have the controller return our new Hello World view with no data to keep things simple. During our install process, we configured Laravel and Jetstream to use Inertia, which is a utility which helps connect our backend PHP and our front-end Vue components. So I'm going to use that here to say that we should display our new Hello World person view. Finally, let's set up a route to point to the controller, which will then return our view. I'll add a new route in routes/web.php to handle GET requests to a person URL. Let's test that. We should see our Hello World view. That looks good. To speed things up, I've already written the HTML for our view component to make it look nice. I'm going to paste that in now to update this component so we have a nice profile page to work with. There we go. That looks pretty nice. Now, let's make our app get data from FileMaker. Our database has a person table, which we're going to want to get data from to display on our person screen in the web app. We need to make a model class in PHP to represent an object for the records in the person table. Laravel's eloquent model system will help us perform all the basic create, read, update, delete operations with some simple query commands, but it also supports much more advanced features like relationships, protected fields, data type casting, mutators, events, and much more. The Eloquent FileMaker package, which comes pre-installed with the Jetstream FileMaker package we installed earlier, allows us to use all of these cool Eloquent features with FileMaker data. I'll create a new model class using the artisan make model command, similar to the make controller command we used earlier. This makes a new model in the app/models directory. I'm going to open this up and change the extends class from a regular eloquent model to an FM model so that it'll work with FileMaker specific behaviors. This is all we need to do to this file to allow Laravel to get data from our database. Laravel is smart with figuring out which tables, or in this case layouts, we need to get data from. Since the model is called person, it's going to look for a people layout, and since we're giving it a prefix to use in our env, it's going to append that to the layout name, and so queries will go to the dappy_people layout. Laravel and Eloquent FileMaker will find and query the layout just based on the name of our class. Time to improve our routing. We want to get a specific person, so I'm going to add a route parameter to the route we created earlier. This route parameter will represent the primary key of the person we want to find and will be forwarded to our controller. Back in our person controller, we can use Laravel's route model binding feature to automatically get the model with the primary key matching the value that was used in the route. I'll add person to match the route parameter variable, which will let Laravel know that we should expect that the route parameter is a primary key, and it'll automatically find the correct record for us and create a new model object. If the ID is invalid, users will get a 404. We want to pass this person record to our front end as a JavaScript object, and so I'll add a data array as a second parameter to our inertia render function to do just that. The key value pairs that we enter here will be received as props by our view component. Now we need to update our view component to receive the person data we are now sending as a prop. We add this by adding define props to our script setup and matching the name of the prop with what we're sending from the backend. Since our page has a form for updating data, I'm also going to use Inertia's form helper to make a new form object. I'll assign the person data from the prop to the form, and then use the prop and the form objects to fill in the data on the page. We're also getting the related company name, which I'm filling in a bit of a weird way right now, but if we wanted to, we could actually map this to a more JavaScript-friendly name using the field mapping feature of Eloquent FileMaker and modifying the model. Let's see what our person profile page looks like now. I'm going to go to person/1, and I should get the person with the primary key of 1 from our database. Hey, there he is. Our person data is coming from FileMaker, going to our backend, being sent to our front-end view component, and being filled in the correct places on the page. Even our photo is being loaded directly from the container field. As I change the URL and update the ID of the record I want to see, we can see that the correct record is loading from our FileMaker database, thanks to the route model binding we're using in Laravel. We never even had to write a query. This is looking pretty good so far, but let's make this a two-way data transfer. I want to make our form submit data back into our FileMaker database. I'm going to update the form so that when we click the update button, our front end will post the form data to our server. I'll start by updating the form submit event to use Inertia's form post helper to send the data back to our server through an AJAX request. I'll need to add another route to receive the post data we're sending from our view component. We'll have this route call an update method in our person controller, similar to how we're calling a show method for our GET requests. Now back to the person controller class to create the update method. This method is going to take two parameters. The first parameter on a call like this will be the request, if we want to include it, and then the second parameter will either be our route parameters or route model binding like in our show function. Since the route model binding is already getting the person object for us, we can just update the properties using the standard Eloquent model updating features. We'll update the properties of our object and then call the save method to save it back to our database. Finally, we'll return a redirect back to the person profile page. Inertia gets this redirect response and will handle updating the profile data without actually refreshing the page. Let's test it out. I'm going to update the person's name and email address as a test and submit the form. Success! The information is updated in our FileMaker database, and our page also shows the new info. We've created a two-way link to our FileMaker database so that we can read and write data from the web. Before we wrap up, let's take a quick look at some of the features we already have in our app that we didn't have to code ourselves. Because we placed our person route behind the auth middleware in our routing file, the profile page is protected and require that a user be logged in to see it. If I log out and try to go back to this page, I'm redirected to the login screen to authenticate before I can see the page. Once I log in, I'm automatically redirected to the correct page that I was trying to see before I was logged in. We already saw the user registration process, and it's great that we didn't have to create that ourselves. As a logged in user, I'm also able to go to my account profile page to update my account information like my name, email, password, enable two-factor authentication, and more. If I forget my password, I can use the password reset functionality to send an email to myself to reset the password. All of these features come pre-built as part of the Jetstream starter kit and are already functional in the app we just put together. All of the pages, styling, and templates are also built as standard Vue components using Tailwind for CSS, so we have complete control to change the layouts and look and feel for any of the pages and interface elements. If we wanted to use side nav instead of top nav, for example, we'd have no problem changing the way the app is laid out. Any developer familiar with Vue would be fine just jumping in and changing any aspect of the app. As far as production deployment is concerned, our app is well structured from anything from simple deployments on shared hosting to CI/CD pipeline deployments behind a CDN and load balancers on things like AWS Elastic Beanstalk. Laravel and Vue are designed with high traffic volume and high performance in mind, and easily support horizontal scaling and caching using services like Redis and Elasticache. Laravel provides a secure, powerful, scalable, and performant backend with lots of built-in convenience features to make your development process smooth and easy, while Vue and Tailwind give you a fast, reactive, responsive, and rich front-end app. Laravel and Vue are two of the most popular frameworks in use today, and with the Eloquent FileMaker and Jetstream FileMaker packages, they make an excellent choice for building fully featured web apps for FileMaker databases. That's it for our session today. If you found this interesting, I encourage you to give developing web apps a shot. All of the frameworks and packages that we installed are free and open source, so you can get started building right away. Please share your successes on social media. We always love to hear when people have a good experience. If you'd like assistance with your project or are looking for someone to build a web app for you, please reach out to Bluefeather through our website at bluefeathergroup.com, give us a call, or send us an email at the address on your screen. We specialize in building web apps and would love to hear about your projects. Thanks, everyone.